Hello. It is great to be joining this conference, so big thank you to everyone that organized it and is going to be joining, whether in person or online. Look forward to meeting you and hopefully speaking with you. My name is Bianca Wiley. I am recording this from Parkdale, Toronto, and I am speaking with a 10-minute timer in the background. So I am recording this with the express intent of keeping it short and also of keeping it very much in draft. What that means is that I'd really enjoy the chance to take these ideas or thoughts further with anyone who wants to talk about them, and particularly if you disagree with anything I say. So I'm going to be talking about public engagement in the regulation of artificial intelligence. And I have to start by saying I'm not sure that regulating artificial intelligence is a good idea. I suppose that requires a little explanation, which is to say that I feel like it's highly possible we're making the same mistake we made with data, where we're sort of inventing an object. Data was one round of this. And artificial intelligence might be another one, that doesn't necessarily need to exist, nor may not be helpful to trying to minimize harm to people, which is a lot of the way that these regulations are being talked about. So what I mean is that if you think about the history of how we have attempted to regulate and legislate things like data, you see a strong consideration of privacy, which of course makes sense. You've also seen the introduction of ideas like data protection. But what both of those ideas don't do is ensure that whatever is being talked about in terms of data use or the use of artificial intelligence is being discussed in very specific context. And so for me, looking at sort of the last 20, 30 years, I don't have any certainty that the approach we've taken to date has been effective enough, is probably the best way to say it. It's not to say that privacy isn't important, because of course privacy is very important, but there are other considerations outside of privacy that appear to be creating different problems for us as a society, and particularly within liberal democracy, which is the system in which I live and exist. Democracy has a bad reputation. I would say that's for good reason, and I'd say that a lot of work needs to be done for us to make better use of some of the opportunities we have to take care of each other through institutions that are democratic. And I don't think doing that gets any easier when we've got such a heavily privatized sphere of infrastructures that are computational infrastructures. So to start, before we get into what it is to publicly engage with artificial intelligence, I'll just reiterate that point, which is to say that treating data or artificial intelligence or software even as an object, rather than considering the outcome of its use, is quite possibly creating a lot more complexity that then almost evades some of the underlying trouble. So point one here is, I think it's beneficial to ask the question, why are we regulating artificial intelligence? And asking that question in partnership with, we didn't regulate software, general purpose software. So why are we doing it for artificial intelligence? I think there would be a lot of good discussion that could come out of those questions before diving into the assumption that we have to regulate artificial intelligence. And perhaps more importantly, the idea that that conversation would help set the table well for any discussion of how to regulate. I do think we're skipping a step by not asking why. Why are we regulating artificial intelligence? What is it? I have an answer that I believe is the answer to that question. So that's point one. Point two is I have been working with lots of other people in the last couple of years to track the creation and discussion of Canada's proposed AI regulation, which is called the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. It was a piece of legislation that caught most of us who watch this space by surprise. It has not been formally taken to the public for consultation. Those who have been in charge of its process have tried to argue that the different ways they've held meetings or engaged with stakeholders are the same as having done proper public consultation. I would argue that they're not. And so when we think about this question of why and how public engagement might happen with artificial intelligence, I think even trying to do public engagement on the topic of artificial intelligence properly would highlight how implausible it is that legislation of this type is actually going to catch significant amounts of the impacts that people are concerned about. Now, I have to stop here and say that the approach that has been taken in Canada and a lot of other places around the world is to try to categorize certain types of artificial intelligence as being high risk. And while I understand why that might be an appealing approach, and to give an example, like think about use of artificial intelligence in healthcare, policing, military, there are so many more uses of artificial intelligence that would never land in the category of high risk and will nonetheless potentially have significant effects on both culture, workplace, society. And here I think it's just natural to point to Ursula Franklin's work, which I think is correct in understanding that technology and culture inform each other. And so without getting mired in what this draft bill is in Canada and what other countries are doing, I'll close with a couple of thoughts here. One of them is that the intensity with which this regulation is being pursued in Canada, and I would argue everywhere else, is really to enable the market. And there's a lot of interest and activity in the economic development potential of artificial intelligence. And so by making it legal, so to speak, it also makes it plausible to many that the uptake and use isn't questioned, particularly if the type of AI in use doesn't fall into the kind of categories that people are trying to invent around, what's risky, what's scary, what's dangerous. Secondly, if you were to imagine 200 people in a room that were asked to come and talk about artificial intelligence, I would just implore you to imagine, if people aren't in the domain or working in tech policy, how those conversations would go. And I think the only way those conversations would make any sense is if contextual cases were discussed. So where is the artificial intelligence being used? By whom? For what purpose? What are the consequences? And if you think about the number of different cases you'd have to discuss about something as general purpose as automation and pattern creation, which is a lot of what artificial intelligence does, you would picked up on the recording, but my 10-minute timer just went off. But basically, if you tried to have a general public consultation about artificial intelligence, just getting on the same page definitionally would be a challenge, given that artificial intelligence is a marketing term. It's a marketing term, and has really taken on a different location in public imagination than what it is and what it can and can't do. So, to close, I would reiterate the first point, which is that the assumption of regulation of artificial intelligence should be checked by the question as to what are we trying to resolve. And it may unfold that what we're trying to resolve would be better served by a different approach, because trying to make the ideas of safety or accountability or ethics or responsibility live within a technology is not possible. Those are the types of approaches that can only be managed by people, and it's the investment in the processes around the use of technology that offer us significantly more power and significantly more agency and control. And so I think, to close, we need to be very careful of the false allure of the idea that a technology can inherently be anything, and remind ourselves that to get to the level of conversations that it sounds like we want to have about various computational technologies, we would have to be having them in so many different contexts and at so many different orders of magnitude that then again we have to stop and say, what is the primary harm or primary issue here that, if resolved, would lead to a more safe, which is a community, safety is not something technical, safety is cultural, but that would lead us to a different place with how we use these technologies. And as always, and as boring as it always is, it's investments in people, in quality of life, in the infrastructures that support a healthy planet and healthy communities. All of these things, if done properly and used to create a good life together, the harms or potential risks of many of these technologies go way down. And then you are left with a narrower set of conversations that would then be available for everybody to take part in. Because until everybody is offered a stable, healthy life, democracy's promise can't be fulfilled either, because as we know, it's not accessible to too many of us. So, thank you for listening. I am excited to talk about these issues more when we all meet up, and thank you again to the organizers. And I'm excited to hear what others are thinking about and working on these days. Thanks again. Look forward to meeting. Bye.